I've been asked by Alice and Jim to kind of reverse the order of the ending of this show today. And what they wanted me first to do is sort of give my summary comments. I was supposed to have 5 minutes to share sort of my last word on the presentations and on the day. And they've asked me to do that now and then break into the panel, because the panel, having that panel discussion is very, very important. And they want to run that all the way to the end, to the very last moment that they possibly can. So I'm going to try to deliver a few comments first and then jump into the panel. So I'll tell you, I've got the last word on the prepared remarks here. And I've got a few points that I want to make. One, most importantly, I think what you've seen across the wide range of these papers today is that the quality of source data, whether that's transactional data, consumption data, exposure data, we've been talking about all kinds of data, is the quality of that data is highly critical. And that includes how that data might be adjusted, ascribed for missing information, placed in consistent input structures with a good understanding for what the data represents, and enabling ongoing processing. It also includes understanding the coverage of the data and what missing data elements mean, and assessing all this about data source quality is really important before you make further decisions about the methodology. Can you even do the attribution you're trying to do? Will it end up working? So selecting that methodology then as a build on to the quality of source data is critical. And for example, Katie's paper talked about that. You need to look at your data to figure out how you might analyze that. Are you going to do first touch, last touch, multi-touch, degrading performance modeling, all kinds of things that we've seen in practice, that you need to understand what type of decision making you're making before you adopt an attribution methodology. I know our standards that we're working on are going to address this in sort of a playbook fashion. Understanding how attribution is being accomplished is key. What this means is this industry is screaming out for greater transparency. There are attribution providers that just don't say enough about what they do and how they do it. And a baseline that needs to improve is transparency. And I'm not just talking about a data label. Data label has a lot of merit. I'm not pushing back on that. But it actually needs to go further. It needs to be methodology description, statistics and KPIs around modeling performance. When you can use it, statistical measures and things like that to make quantifiable estimates of the performance of models and your attributions. This coverage decision is very critical in this area because we should be disclosing our blind spots. And last, as I alluded to, using rigorous science is probably the last thing we're focused on. You need to test and control. You need to do that in a disciplined way and consider statistics-based reporting rigor. That's just to name a few of the things, and most of these are really touched on in the papers that we've seen today. We've learned that there are some very cool processes that organizations are putting forward when facing data and attribution challenges. We've also learned that variability in undisclosed practices are hurting us. Speaking for the MRC and myself, we're really looking forward to our work in standard setting in this area. I believe it's necessary work. I hope today gave you an appreciation for the breadth and depth of work that's being done by practitioners out there, organizations who specialize in this. We need to bring more discipline overall to the process, but I have a lot of hope. I'm hopeful that we're seeing greater transparency. We might eventually see moves towards auditing. So those are kind of my closing thoughts, and we're going to go to the panel. Before I do that, I want to put in a plug for the evaluation of the seminar today. You have an ability to complete an evaluation of today's events, what you've learned, did you find today insightful? We'd like to see those evaluations. I know Jim and Alice in the ARF really would like to see that. I hope that you've enjoyed these presentations as much as I have. So now we're gonna invite our panelists who are all attached here to chat with us. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I see all of you guys on screen, so we got some questions for the audience, and I had prepared some questions, but we're going to go to a few of these audience questions first. And so I'll pick out a few, and you guys, I don't know if you've seen these, but we got a question for Howard and Jane. And I'm not editing these questions or anything, I'm just giving them to you. This question is, as far as TV inputs go, has anyone ever considered using Google Analytics, which is so extensively used and free? Do you guys have any comments about that? Howard and Jane.
Yeah, I'll start, Howard, and you can jump in if you want to. Yeah, there is a company that actually is doing that, where they take the exposure data from smart TVs or set-top boxes. I'm forgetting, I think it's smart TV data that they use. And they compare that using a timestamp to the free, API from Google Analytics to look at, search results for those brands. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Howard, but I do know of at least one company doing that.
Yeah, Jane, I think you're referencing Edo, right?
Yeah, I wasn't their name, but that's okay.
Yeah, sorry. No, look, I think, the question is, the challenge is, how do we get TV data at the scale we need that is accurate in terms of knowing what's on the screen and, is as projectable as possible to the US? I don't know if they fill that, check off all those buckets or not, George.
Yeah, no, the only thing, caution I would make on that is just that they don't actually divide people into exposed and unexposed groups. So it's kind of not a classic experimental design. It's really just to, kind of a correlation of did this happen at the same time. But I know it's, it's a relatively inexpensive way to do, to get some pretty key insights.
Yep.
Yes. Hi, this is Angelina. So from my understanding is that you can't really match the Google IDs to the TV data because there's no true linking mechanisms to do so. But what a lot of advertisers have done is overlaid their TV schedule plan into the Google Analytics so that they can see an overall trend. So if they've seen an increase in GRPs or a specific number of users or time of day, day of week, and overlaying that onto a timeline so that they can see the correlation of traffic site visits to a company's website or not. But in order to really get that one-to-one attribution, it's not really providing that full extent of insights.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the comment. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, unless you go to Google.
Then you probably have to process it through ADH. I kind of agree with the comment that it's very difficult to match the Google data with TV exposure data. Even if you load common schedules, that has a lot of accuracy challenges. And the one other thing I would raise about the Google Analytics data, it's free and it's very economical to use, but there's also a great deal of freedom given to the user and in setup of the Google Analytics data, like placing where the measurement occurs, what pages it occurs on, and how and when that measurement occurs in the arrangement. And we've seen in other forums that can be manipulated in ways that can change counting and accumulate things into counting which really shouldn't be accumulated. So it's pretty far from a structured, managed, let's say accuracy managed platform in what you would consider powerful enough to make big financial decisions with. But that might be editorializing on my part. I'm going to just jump, unless any panelists have anything else to say, I'm going to jump to the next question. And this one is directed to Michael Cohen. What granularity of TV spend are you capable of measuring? Are you able to use other metrics like GRPs, impressions? If you want to take that on, Michael.
Quickly, you want to at least get to the amount of impressions, right? GRP is this mix of reach and frequency, and some of what I highlighted is that needs to be decoupled because those are non-random sort of things. So GRP is a metric that you can certainly report, but you want to get to impressions, and the more tactical granularity and day part, network, message, and creative, requires set-top box data that needs to be cleaned by some of the stuff that Howard and Jane were talking about. And then you have a data set that requires more processing to correct it through sampling procedures, right, to make it representative. But if you have a sample of data and representative types of television devices, and you're able to record that sort of level, then you can measure the impact of very specific, message day part in the context of your entire marketing mix as a dimension of the marketing response function that you're trying to recover to do things like planning and attribution. Those are just byproducts of, the modeling exercise.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any points to share? All right, I'm going to go to another question. And this one is for Eric. You mentioned scaling these, I think he's talking about the television model that you put in your presentation, these clusters of people to linear media. How are you applying your learnings to TV ads? And are you measuring any kind of performance feedback to validate the model? So basically, are you applying learnings to ads directly, or are you measuring any kind of performance feedback to validate your model, Eric?
Yeah, so for anything that we do in the addressable marketplace, we hold control groups and we match through to sale. So we ran 9 different addressable campaigns in Q1, and all 9 showed positive lift in sales. I think from a linear standpoint, obviously a little bit more of a challenge. We are using the model to inform our buys. So for example, certain shows might over-index against our model, but outside of that, no, we don't have a way to optimize linear with it based off results, because the data is just not there. But we do use the models to inform our buys and our tentpole events and everything else based off that high propensity audience.
Cool. There's another question here directed to Howard. And I guess since I work for the MRC, I should use this question because I think it's actually a good reminder. Howard, you used the term exposure, and then clearly used it based on a wide variety of definitions, which the questioner is saying is very disconcerting. It only has one definition for advertisers, surely, ARF model level 3. Howard, do you want to talk a little bit about exposure and what you guys are meaning by that? I think the questioner's kind of getting at, are we talking about opportunity to see? Are we talking about actual knowledge of a person's eyeballs seeing a screen, that kind of thing, and differentiating between those terms?
Yeah, so if you think about the attribution providers that we studied, they were either using set-top box data, which is not people with eyeballs. It's a set-top box tuned in a household to a channel at a time when the log file says a commercial is running. Or we're using TV set ACR data, which says we know that this content, this frame of an ad, hit a screen at a specific time. So no, you know, we're not getting at actual people watching. You know, look, I think the point we were making is right now in the marketplace, different providers use different time criteria. Some people say that 1 second is exposure to an ad. You know, the far extreme is there are some providers who are using the Nielsen aggregate to the minute level, and there ought to be one standard. And George, look, do a commercial for your duration weighted exposure measure. It should tie to that and what level of exposure we know drives a given outcome. Jane, anything to add?
Well, no, I'll just say that I know that question's from Tony because he always asks that question, and he's technically correct in that all that we're talking about here are tuning, you know, it's TV tuning. He is also correct in, you know, admonishing the industry that we kind of are too casual about using this word exposure, but it's become, you know, just kind of a shorthand for referring to ad impressions across all different media. We're not saying that anybody is in front of the television set. That's not really how we were using it in these instances. So, you know, he's right to make these corrections, but I think, you know, it's the point. It's not really the point of exactly what we were talking about. But thank you anyway, Tony.
Yes, and that's why we've affectionately and with respect given Tony the nickname of the sheriff, because he raises these points and they're very valuable to keep considering. But Howard and Jane, just to build on your paper though, measuring people at the end of the day, eyeballs on something is even further more difficult than just measuring whether, let's say, viewable conditions were met on the hardware, on the screen. It's so much harder to measure whether somebody was actually in the audience and doing something to watch and taking in the content. But to the point of your paper, even not trying to get that far difficult, all you're trying to do is establish consistency among the controllable conditions. And you saw such wide variety of results. Even imagine how difficult it would have even been and how even further inconsistent it would have been if all of those providers had strapped on the top of that estimates for persons usage actually viewing the content. You would have had more noise enter into the picture. So I think your point is still very valid. The points you're making in your paper.
Yeah, and I do also think that, you know, there's a continuum here that SIM's trying to support the development of a lot of these new tools. But, you know, we have to kind of take steps to get there. Obviously, we'd all love to be at a granular level data set that's got persons' eyes on the screen, you know, for all 120 million households and 300 and whatever million, 30 million people in the country. It's going to take, you know, steps to get there, and there may be modeling involved in all of that due to all these, you know, privacy considerations as well. So I think what, you know, that the goal is to try to get the accuracy as each step as we're going, to try to get to that final, you know, goal.
Yeah, and there's another point there, and that is not overframe what we have. Like if we don't have people, let's make sure we call it a viewable condition, which is just a non-person condition or something like that, or even if it's a rendered impression or something. But I think we should move on. The last question maybe is to Katie, the last paper. This is a good question because I think I even had the same question when I was looking at the presentation. could you please explain further how you connect the dots between the two parts of the pyramid, the MMM at the top and the scattered data collected at the bottom? So your holistic data simulation method in between to get more granular. How do you connect the top and the bottom of your pyramid, Katie?
A great question, and I'm glad it was raised so I can clarify that. We actually don't take that top-down, bottoms-up approach with kind of bringing that to light as the industry standard of a unified measurement approach. But what we do is take different levels of information depending on what's going to be most meaningful for a particular client. And usually the sweet spot is somewhere in between, maybe pulling some data sets from the top and the bottom, but not relying on one or the other or both of those in a vacuum. And the reason is with the kind of very top layer, the traditional marketing mix, that's really just way too high level. And so there's usually at least market level information or store level information or customer segment data that we find much more valuable to an analysis like this. And at the bottom, you know, we kind of talked about how fragmented and how fraught with inaccuracy that information can be. So really we are only leveraging that data in unique circumstances where we're confident that there's enough spend, there's enough reliable information at that level that we can go deep into a touch point and provide you know, deeper, more granular results than what we're able to get from the mid layers, if that makes sense.
I see. Well, I'd be anxious to see more details out. Speaking personally, I find it fascinating. So, well, I'm going to, I think we're over time. I wanted to thank all the panelists for the great work today, the insights shared, for indulging the questions and my summation. And I want to thank Jim and Alice and the ARF for maintaining this session, even during these challenging times. I think it's something all of us need to continue to hear about.